I can honestly say that JavaScript very nearly ended my career as a software developer. I hated dealing with React and Next so much that I was almost like, I'm done. I'm just going to write backend code from now on. I'm never writing another web application again. And for a while, that was the case. I worked on a really long project in Rust. I worked on a lot of malware projects. I basically did everything that I could to write as much code as humanly possible without writing any front end code, or at least JavaScript code. And honestly, for a while, I took a good bit of time off from web applications. And I said to myself, I may not write web applications anymore. This sounds dramatic, but I just genuinely had a hatred for how ridiculously complex JavaScript frameworks had gotten, and how essentially there's no way to do modern front ends without doing JavaScript, because it, in my mind, that was just not done. So I took a little bit of time off, and in that time I saw a lot of people starting to talk about Go. So I told myself, like, hey, I've been doing Rust for a while. I've kind of found a lot of the limitations of Rust, or at least the gotchas. I'm not going to go into detail about that. Let's take a little bit of time and learn some Go. So I did what any good software developer does. They write malware in a language so that they can learn more about it. And I did that. I wrote a couple of like backend web servers, and I learned a little bit more about the language. And the more I learned about it, the more I kind of realized, like, hey, this is like a lot of the power of Rust and a lot of the ease of use of Python, and very little of the gotchas within Rust. Maybe it's a little bit slower. Maybe there are some things here and there that could be improved. People always like complain about the error dot does not equal nil thing. That's kind of silly. But I started diving into Go a little bit. And that was right around the time that I started paying attention to HTMX and kind of looking at the development of HTMX and kind of trying to figure it out. So I dove in a little bit more. And I realized that the thing that I was missing was simplicity. The thing that I wanted to get back was just writing code, not wrangling with a ton of dependencies, not wrangling with a ton of weird magic that, React and Next.js kind of deal with. What I realized was I needed simplicity back. I needed to write some like normal vanilla JavaScript. I needed to write some normal vanilla HTML. And I started looking more into it, and I kind of wrote my first small web app that I've actually got deployed now, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Now, I'm going to preface this with saying I am not at all an expert. I'm trying to figure out how to zoom here while I say that I'm not an expert. I am not at all an expert in HTMX and Go. There's going to be some stuff here that's wrong. So we're going to take a look at Loki. Loki is my cryptocurrency kind of like intelligence platform. So let's take a look at, we need to look at web server, and we've got webserver.go. Now again, there's going to be some stuff wrong here. I can guarantee you I am not doing this very well, but there are lots of different things that I'm probably doing wrong here, but I'm going to kind of go over the very basics. So Go, all it's really doing is serving as a router that is passing you templated HTML and serving as an API. So there's some API stuff here as well. I'm not going to get as much into that because this is much more about the actual templating. So let's go to, I believe it should be CA Meta. Yeah, so this is a very, very basic type of HTMX like front end. So you can immediately see some of the templating here. I'm passing in prod, which is basically an environment variable that says whether or not we're in production or not. And if we're in production, then I'm going to pass the Fathom script here, which is going to be like what I actually use to gather metrics for a site. And here we've got the actual form. So let me go over to this. I was looking at a Zach Tallender video. And let's go over to Loki. So this right here is the website that we're looking at. It basically, all it really does is gather information about mints. So a mint is basically like what creates a meme coin on Pump Fun. So this doesn't do anything particularly interesting because you can just hop over to Pump Fun and view the horrors that man hath created here. So we've got, this is the King of the Hill coin at the moment. This is not something you should ever invest in, but basically all this is really doing is allowing me to pop in a CA, which is a contract address, and get the meta information about that. Again, nothing really interesting, like nothing super cool or anything like that. But it is kind of like my first small HTMX web application. So if we pop over here to the code, all you're really doing here is you are submitting this information to the backend, and then it is going to replace that with all of the information that is within there. So whenever I make that backend call, it's going to send back raw HTML, and that is going to replace what is here in the HX target. So that's really all that's doing. Sorry, my dogs are absolutely losing their mind here. So essentially all this is doing is it is sending a post request with this form data to /submit_CA, and it is trying to get whatever is being served up there. So whatever is in response to that, it is going to swap it out with what is within this div. So it is basically saying this is the target, this ID is the target, and this is what it's doing. It is swapping out the inner HTML. So if we pop over to, this is submit_CA, here's our handler function here, and it is sending it to handle submit CA. So func handle submit CA. So this is the function that actually does it. So it is creating this HTML string that it is then going to send back as a result. So it is going to grab everything from the actual database itself. In the backend, if it's not able to grab things from the database, it's going to grab it from the blockchain itself. So that's what's happening here behind the scenes. So let's go and look at this HTML string. So let's do parse CA info, and that's where we're getting the HTML string. And this is where it's being created. So it's creating a div, it's creating the coin name, all of this fun info right here, and it is being passed the CA info from the thing that's calling it. So parse CA info, it is getting that CA info from right here, from this actual call into the database function. And again, that call into the database function is actually going to grab it from the blockchain if it doesn't have it into the database. So that is sending back raw HTML, back to our template. So if we go to CA meta, this template, all of this, basically this div, is going to be filled up with the information. So if we go back to our, let's see, our web page here, we can refresh it. Probably should have grabbed that CA. Yep. Let's go back to pump fund. Grab this. Looks like this coin is currently pumping, which is interesting. So if we look here at the actual HTML itself, you may not be able to see that. So if you look at the HTML itself right here, this is the div that we're looking for. Currently there's nothing in it. When we press the submit button, all of a sudden it fills up with the actual information itself. All that this is really doing is making a call to your backend and swapping out what is in this target with the HTML that's returned in the backend. Now, what happens normally is you ship a ton of JavaScript code whose pure design is essentially to pull down JSON from your backend and parse that JSON into the actual data itself. That creates so much overhead in the background that you don't even really realize. Instead of just sending raw HTML back from your backend, like you're shipping like hundreds of kilobytes of data just so you can like do some swappy doos with some JSON. Like that's completely pointless. And that's why I really like the simplicity of HTMX so far. Now, again, I'm not an expert at this, but so far I really love the simplicity of HTMX because it completely takes away most of the magic. Like the vast majority of the magic that's involved in Next.js and React just disappears. And you have the simplicity of the web back with like some of the interactivity that you kind of are used to from React. So you can very easily make backend calls and very easily update the DOM without really having to worry about all the magic that's involved in the backend of like React or Next or something huge. It's also tiny, like it's a very, very small piece of JavaScript. So if you look over here, let's look at our network. Let's see if I can refresh the cache yeah, so if we look at htmx.org, this right here is, I'm trying to look at this a little bit more clearly. Let's see if I can pull this up. So if you look here, that is like a tiny resource. So that is like a 54 kilobyte resource is what I'm looking at here. So it is tiny. Like these are very, very tiny requests compared to something in like React or, Next or something like that, that it would send back. So really, 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 like you would genuinely benefit a lot from at least just reading up about HTMX and Go. You can also do HTMX and Rust or HTMX and Python. Tons of people do that. But HTMX is just kind of like the plugin that you can use for making a lot of the reactivity happen on a web application. It does struggle dealing with things that are a little bit more complex than what we're talking about. I just realized that I was not actually showing my screen here. So this is the screen that I was showing. That is your 54 kilobytes of data here. It does struggle with some of like the complex stuff. And I don't think that you could build out a fully featured, really hyper interactive site with just HTMX. But that's where you can just add on raw, like vanilla JavaScript instead of like a huge, giants framework. You can use something a lot smaller. I'm kind of rambling at this point. The point is, go check out HTMX and Go like try to build something really simple and maybe put it up on the internet like I have. You can check this out, by the way, at loki.valhallaresearch.net. I will leave a link in the description that you can go and check it out. There's, again, nothing super interesting there right now, but at some point in the future, it'll be a lot bigger. I'll leave that alone, though. That's about it. Take it easy. Peace.